My name is Kayser. I'm an artist living and working in Johannesburg, South Africa. My primary medium is painting. I also make drawings, though for the most part I'm concerned with oil painting on a fairly large scale. My work is almost exclusively figurative, in a way you could almost say aggressively figurative. I do enjoy abstract art in some other artists, but for myself, my concern is primarily with narrative and storytelling, and as such, my work is figurative. I also find there's a certain discipline and rigor that I'm drawn to when working figuratively, where if you want to make a chair look like a chair, you have to look at it. If you want to make a tree look like a tree, you have to look at it, and that looking and translating is an activity that interests me. The content of my work is usually based on my thoughts and concerns at a particular time. That obviously is fluid, and I think as people I would like to think, in flux and hopefully improving. So those concerns tend to vary, though if I look at the work over a number of years, it's always interesting to see that there is a particular sensibility or a thread that is followed through. There's always a tension or a dance, if you like, between what I want to say and what I'm seeing develop in front of me, and I need to be flexible and sensitive to what is being revealed. It's not always about what I want to say. I need to be aware of what the work is saying to me too. If those two elements, that tension can come into balance, then I can every now and then produce a successful work. For me, it's also important that there's a degree of commentary in the work, social commentary if you like, though I never want to slip over into a position where I'm grandstanding or telling people how it is or dictating a particular agenda. Over the past year, I've been doing scenes set in suburbia in South Africa, using, for the most part, Johannesburg as a reference. These works are concerned with how a particular portion of our population lives in a certain way, often at the expense of others. That said, the narrative is interpretive. I bring a number of elements together based on whatever thoughts and concerns there are, and those thoughts and concerns can also be based on the technical aspects of painting or what I'm trying to accomplish just on the journey of oil painting as a technique. Ultimately, the work needs an audience in order to be completed. The viewer's interpretation is very important for me. I'm always open to hearing different interpretations of the work. Some of my recent works, which are regarded as quite satirical and critical, were perceived by some viewers as quite happy scenes, and I was quite okay with that. That was actually quite refreshing to me. Again, it's not a matter of me dictating what the work is about. Once the work is out there, I would like to think that it has a life of its own. My ultimate hope is that the work will elicit some emotional response in the viewer. What inspires me to create my work? The age-old question of inspiration. And this I always like to refer to the artist Chuck Close, who said that inspiration is for amateurs, the rest of us just show up and get to work. This is something I've always felt very strongly, and if I just sit around waiting for the gods of inspiration, it would most likely prove to be a very long wait, and I would never get anything done. For the most part, I get inspiration from spending a lot of time in the studio, just racking up the hours, working and seeing the work develop in front of me, and that I would say is my main source of inspiration. inspiration does come in other ways, but it's not necessarily that is just translated directly into the work. I mean, I can feel inspired, and this might sound a little bit corny, by looking at the clouds or looking at a particular shape of a tree. Though it's not like I then rush to the studio feeling like I want to make an artwork. So inspiration comes from a lot of places. Lately, I find a lot of inspiration in particular from something I describe as ugly pretty, or pretty ugly, and that comes from living in the city in Johannesburg. I live and work from my studio in the inner city, and the surrounding area is not exactly what you would call aesthetically pleasing, but at the same time it has a particular quality that is intriguing and I find myself drawn to. The Johannesburg landscape, particularly in winter, a lot of people might describe as quite bleak and grim, whereas I see a certain beauty in it. Very washed out, bleached sort of colours. The grass has gone all yellow. All the flora has turned like umber and orange, and a whole range of reds, and the sky is a pale blue. There's always a haze hanging over the city from all the fires. It's so dry here, and there's always a fire burning, and there's always a column of smoke rising in the distance somewhere. None of these would necessarily be described as aesthetically pleasing, and again, a lot of people might see it as quite grim. But I found myself drawn to this, and if you want to call it that, inspired. My favorite artwork or project that I have worked on, and why? This always seems a slightly absurd question to me. I honestly don't have a particular one favorite. If I would have to pick something, I would say it's usually the project or the artwork that I'm busy with at present. I tend to be very self-critical, and I'm on a constant, slightly desperate mission to improve all the time. So I'm always hoping that the work that I'm busy with at any given moment is going to be my favorite. I don't really dwell on the past very much, so once the work is completed and leaves the studio and goes out into the world, I'm happy to have a record of it and to reflect on it from time to time, but I'm very quickly moving on to my concern is with the work that I'm busy with. There are, of course, works that I look back on that I have very fond memories of, or that represent seminal moments in the development of my work, and that I regard highly, but I couldn't choose one favorite. I'm always concerned with what is happening now in my studio, and that's the only way I can work. Artists or creatives that have influenced me or that I see as visionary. That's always quite a tricky question. The list is usually in flux, often being added to, sometimes subtracted from. If I'm thinking of visionaries, there is one artist who stands head and shoulders above all the rest for me, and that would be Goya. His work sits right in the cusp of modern art. I love the dark nature of his work, the social commentary, and if I had to choose my favorite artworks of all time, it would be Goya's black paintings. With Goya, it's also the first time we really have an example of an artist creating work for himself that isn't intended to be seen by the public. I would say that Goya has definitely been the most influential artist for me. On a more contemporary level, there are so many artists, but I'm also very influenced by the American painter Kerry James Marshall, German artist Neo Rausch, and really a whole host of others. There are so many amazing, fascinating artists that it's always very difficult for me to choose one or two in particular. More recently, I've been influenced by medieval tapestries and folk art. The list really is endless, and I often have to try and rein myself in, because I'm constantly seeing something new that is inspiring me, or sort of nudging at the door, and potentially becoming an influence, and I often have to just kind of calm it down, and yeah, there's so much amazing work out there that it's difficult to narrow the field down.